At 35 years old, I've built a life that, from the outside, seems perfect. My career as an interior architect in New York has taken me to places I only dreamed of. Yet, every December, I'm haunted by a memory of a single, cold night. The night my dad looked me in the eye and, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, told me I was no longer welcome at our family's Christmas party. His reason, my younger brother, Noah, was bringing his successful new fiancée home, and my presence, my own success, might make her feel overshadowed. It's funny, isn't it? How a lifetime of being told you're too independent, too strong, can ultimately make you a stranger in your own home. Before I dive into the full story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. And thank you so much for being here. My name is Caroline Foster, and at 35, my life, on the surface, is a tapestry of quiet, perfect moments. I'm a successful interior architect. My designs gracing magazines and the homes of New York's elite. My studio, a loft flooded with sunlight, overlooks the Brooklyn Bridge, a constant reminder of the world I built for myself, piece by piece, far from the life I was supposed to have. My past, however, is a shadow that lengthens with the changing seasons, especially as December approaches. Growing up in a suburb of Boston, our family seemed to be a picture of suburban bliss, a perfect photograph for a holiday card. But behind the closed doors of our colonial house, the air was heavy with an unspoken law. My younger brother, Noah, was the fragile jewel, and I was the sturdy oak, expected to weather any storm, to stand tall without a single word of praise. The disparity began early. When Noah would return from school with a B-, my parents would treat it as a monumental victory, a sign of his growing intellectual maturity, and reward him with a new video game or a trip for ice cream. When I brought home straight A's, my mother would simply nod, her lips forming a thin line, and say, "That's what we expect from you, Caroline." My achievements were not celebrated. They were merely the baseline. My parents attended every one of Noah's Little League games, even when his team lost every single match of the season and he spent the entire time on the bench. But when my debate team qualified for the state championship, a moment I had spent 2 years working towards, my father claimed a last-minute work commitment and my mother suddenly had a headache. I took the bus alone, won first place, and came home to find them on the couch, watching a baseball game on TV. "Noah needs our support more than you do, sweetie," my mother said softly, as if she were delivering a profound piece of wisdom. "You're so independent. He's still finding his way." The message was etched in my memory. Noah was meant to be nurtured, to be guided, to be given every advantage, while I was meant to pave my own path, to fend for myself, to simply exist as the backdrop for his life. That unspoken reality crystallized on the night of a Christmas dinner 10 years ago. A year after my father's car accident had confined him to a wheelchair. The atmosphere in our dining room was unusually somber, the festive table decorations feeling out of place. After a quiet meal, my father cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Noah. "I've decided to formalize the transfer of the company," he said, his voice strained but firm. "It's time for Noah to take over." He spoke about Noah's natural charisma and his ability to connect with people, as if those were qualifications for running a multi-million-dollar construction business. My heart, which had always harbored a secret hope that I, with my architectural passion and my relentless work ethic, would one day lead the family business, felt as if it had been encased in ice. A few weeks after that dinner, I went to my father's home office. I had a file filled with architectural plans, ideas I'd been working on for years, hoping to modernize the family business. "Dad," I said, "I know you've decided on Noah, but I've put together some plans. Maybe I could help from the side, a consulting role." My father, who was meticulously organizing his medicine, didn't even look up. "Caroline," he said, his voice softer than usual, but with an edge of finality. "Noah needs to learn to do this on his own. He'll make mistakes, but that's how he'll grow. Your role is to stand back and let him." You don't need to interfere. The word interfere stung. It wasn't about helping, it was about getting in his way. I took a deep breath, clutching the folder, and simply nodded. That evening, I shredded all the blueprints, watching my decade of plans turn into confetti. The family's silent agreement to ignore my professional life was broken only once. At a dinner party hosted by my parents for some family friends and business associates, one of my father's longtime partners, Mr. Henderson, a kind old man with a sharp mind, cornered me near the dessert table. "Caroline," he said quietly, "your father tells me you're an architect now. He says you're doing well." I gave him a non-committal smile. "Well, I'm trying," I said. "I'm working on a few small things." "Mister?" Henderson leaned in. "Small things. Your father told me he handed over the company to Noah because he's a people person. I always thought you were the one with the vision. It's a shame, a real shame." He patted my shoulder and walked away, leaving me standing in the silent kitchen, the noise of the party suddenly seeming so far away. It was a fleeting moment, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade, but it was enough to show me that outsiders saw the truth, even if my family chose to ignore it. The true breaking point came this past December, when my phone rang on a chilly Tuesday morning. It was my mother, her voice unusually cheerful, even for her. "Caroline, honey," she chirped, "I have the most wonderful news. Your brother is getting engaged to the most lovely girl. Her name is Isabella, and she's a very successful real estate lawyer in New York." My mother's tone was full of an awe I had never heard her use for me, as if Isabella's career was a far greater accomplishment than my own. A few days later, Isabella called me directly. Her voice was polished, her tone overly friendly, but with an underlying current of arrogance. "I'm so excited to be joining the family," she said. "Noah has told me so much about you. I just had a feeling we'd get along. Being two successful women in such a male-dominated world. Noah and I are going to be such a power couple. He has the business, and I have the law." I felt a shiver of unease. It was a polite warning. She was staking her claim, making it clear that my success was a side note to her new role as the family's other star. Then came my mother's call, dropping the final bombshell. "Oh, and we're having a small party for her," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I think it would be better if you didn't come, to avoid any awkwardness." A coldness spread through my chest, a chill far deeper than the winter air. "Awkwardness, Mom?" I asked, my voice flat. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Well, darling, you're so accomplished, Isabella. She's a lawyer, yes, but you're a designer with your own firm. People might start comparing you, and you know how sensitive Noah can be. We just want her to feel comfortable in the family. She's so used to being the star." Her voice was a sugary poison, and I felt the last threads of my naive hope unravel. I didn't get angry. I just felt a profound sense of sadness. The family I had so desperately wanted to be a part of was so insecure about its own members that they were willing to exclude one to protect the other. I simply said, "I understand. I'll pass on the invitation." And then, for the first time in my life, I hung up on my mother without another word. I didn't tell my partner, David, what had happened. He knew my family was complicated, but he didn't know the depth of their cruelty. I just focused on my work that day. I put a deposit down on a historic building in Brooklyn Heights, a project so ambitious and so grand that it would consume all of my time and energy. It was more than a professional venture. It was a defiant act of self-worth. I was building my own legacy, a monument to the life they had told me I wasn't worthy of. A few weeks later, a small box arrived at my office. It was from my mother. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, were some old pieces of jewelry from my grandmother. There was no apology note, just a small card with my mother's careful cursive script, "You are and always will be my pride." The words were meant to be comforting, but they were empty. It was a gesture of appeasement, a transactional apology meant to buy her peace of mind. I put the box away in a drawer and didn't look at it again. I stopped answering their calls and emails. The silence was not a punishment for them, it was a gift to myself. The hollow space that had always existed inside me began to fill, not with their approval, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my worth wasn't dependent on their validation. One evening, I was working late on the designs for the Brooklyn Heights project, a glass of wine on my desk. I paused, scrolling through my social media feed, a habit I had tried to break but always came back to, and then I saw it. A picture of my parents and Noah, all smiling broadly in front of the Christmas tree. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas with Noah and his amazing fiancée, Isabella. So proud of these two. They're going to do great things." The picture felt like a punch to the gut, but instead of crying or getting angry, I simply smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was also a peaceful one. Their Christmas party, a symbol of the exclusion I had always felt, was now a small, irrelevant event in a world that I had created for myself. I closed my laptop, poured myself another glass of wine, and let the quiet dignity of my new life wash over me. A few months passed in a blur of meetings, blueprints, and late nights. The Brooklyn Heights project was moving forward at a rapid pace, and I was completely immersed in the work. One morning, I was in a meeting with a potential investor when my assistant came in, looking slightly flustered. "Miss Foster, there's a gentleman here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent and related to the project." I excused myself and walked out to the reception area. Standing there, awkwardly adjusting his tie, was my brother, Noah. He looked different, thinner, and his usual swagger was gone. He was here to pitch me a project. He told me he was looking for a new partner for the family business, which he confessed had been struggling since my father's retirement. He didn't say the word failing, but it was clear from his tone and the tired lines on his face. He presented a folder filled with blueprints and design concepts, all amateurish and uninspired. He talked about new ventures and strategic pivots, but his words lacked substance. He was a salesman with nothing to sell. He believed I was just a regular architect, someone he could impress with his title and his family name. He asked me to consider investing in his project, believing that my success could somehow rub off on him. I sat there, listening to him, and 1,000 memories rushed back the debate championship I won alone. The luggage my mother gave me as a graduation gift, the countless times my parents had told me I was too independent. He had no idea what I had achieved. He saw me as a means to an end, a small-time architect who could be convinced to invest in his failing business. When he finished his pitch, a long and rambling monologue about the company's potential, I simply reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my business card. I slid it across the table to him. He looked at it, then at me, and his face, for the first time in his life, was a blank canvas. His eyes darted from the card to me, and the confident look he had arrived with crumbled into a mixture of confusion and abject horror. He read the card again, slowly, and I could see his lips mouth the words Caroline Foster, principal investor. He didn't understand. "What? What is this?" he stammered, his voice a whisper. "This is a joke, right? I'm here to talk to you about investing in my company, not the other way around." I simply smiled, a serene, unbothered smile. "Noah," I said softly, my voice calm and even, "I am the principal investor in the project you're trying to get a meeting for. I've owned that building for 3 months." He stared at me, his eyes wide, and he didn't say another word. He just stood up, gathered his things, and walked out of my office. He didn't look back. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving me alone in the silent, sunlit room. Just as I was about to call David to tell him what had happened, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Isabella. "Noah told me what happened." The message read, "You really hurt him. You know, he's been trying so hard to save the company, and you just had to make a scene. You should have known we needed your help. Why are you so set on punishing your family?" I read her words, and for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. It was an overwhelming sense of clarity. They weren't just oblivious. They were entirely incapable of seeing their own role in this. They had twisted the narrative to make me the villain, the one who was punishing them. Rather than acknowledging their decades of neglect, I simply blocked her number without a single word. A few months passed in a quiet blur. I found out through an old friend that the family business had been sold. Noah had run it into the ground, and my father had to let it go. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic apology, just a quiet, predictable end. One rainy Sunday afternoon, a feeling of melancholic nostalgia came over me, and I drove to my old neighborhood. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just needed to see the house one last time before it became a memory. The for sale sign on the front lawn felt like a punctuation mark on a long, complicated sentence as I sat in my car, staring at the empty windows. I found myself thinking not of the pain, but of a specific small moment from my childhood. I remembered a time when Noah and I were kids, and he had hidden one of my favorite toys. I had been so mad. But when I found it, there was a small note from him that said, "Sorry, I just wanted to see you for a little longer." It was a tiny moment, and it was the only apology he had ever given me. I had kept the note in an old shoebox in my closet. The thought of that little note, a small, genuine moment of regret, was a reminder that he was once a person, not a project, but the years had turned him into something else. I wiped a tear from my cheek, started the car, and drove away without looking back. One afternoon, David and I were at a wedding for a close friend of mine. It was a beautiful outdoor ceremony filled with music and laughter. As we were walking to the reception area, I saw my family. My parents were sitting at a table, looking small and fragile, and Noah was standing awkwardly beside them. They looked up and saw me, and a wave of recognition, of shock, passed over their faces. My mother's mouth opened as if to say something, and my father's hand reached for his armrest. I looked at them, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of detachment. I had moved on, I had built a new life, and they were no longer a part of it. I gave them a small, polite nod, and then I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I had found my own home, and it was a home I had built all by myself. As we drove away from the wedding, David reached for my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Seeing them, "Was it hard?" I smiled and squeezed his hand. "No," I said, a sense of calm washing over me. "I used to want them to see what I had become, to see how wrong they were. But I don't need that anymore. I found my own happiness, and it has nothing to do with their approval. I found my peace." The car drove on, leaving the past behind, and I felt completely free.